Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. This is the 10th part of What If Deku Had a Robot Wolf. I hope you enjoy. Link to the original story and author in the description. Chapter 10, Quirk Apprehension. Izumi woke up the next morning with a smile, snuggling up to her Durandal plush whilst the real Durandal lay on the floor in standby mode, not technically asleep but always observant. Yesterday was great. After Kanetsutsumi had left, everyone went around introducing themselves and show off their quirks. Much to Izumi's delight, her notebook was out the moment quirks were mentioned, as well as Mei, who was using this as an opportunity to see what babies she could make for them. Since they will be working together for the next 3 years, it was best that they knew who everyone else was and what they could do. Momo and Inesa introduced themselves to everyone as they came in, so they only had to tell them about their quirks. Momo's quirk, creation, allowed her to create any non-living thing, whilst Inesa's quirk, whirlwind, allowed him to control the air around him. Hitoshi and Nito introduced themselves next, followed by Izumi. She showed off the green lightning and red veins in what she had dubbed, one for all, full cowling, although she just called it full cowling out loud, since none of them knew about All Might's secret. She had gotten better with it, and after further testing, she could handle around 5% of one for all without a problem. She then introduced Durandal, telling them what he could do and his status as an emotional support robot, as well as showing off armored wolf mode. She didn't show off the MIWR system, as she still wasn't sure she would need or use it. Still got Mei's complete undivided attention, who asked if she could have his blueprints. She was quickly denied. But Durandal was in need of a hardware update, so perhaps Mei could upgrade his systems. She just has to be careful not to tell her about the quirk emulator. Achiko went next, followed by the rest of the students. The yellowed-haired boy went after her. Denki Kaminari, his quirk allowed him to charge and emit electricity from his body. But if he uses too much, his brain short-circuits. Tenya went next, proudly displaying his engine quirk that allowed him to run faster. It was also fueled by orange juice, which was nice. Izumi knew of someone in Germany who had a slightly similar quirk, but he had to drink petrol for it to work. The girl with the frog mutation went next, introducing herself as Suyu Ajui. Her quirk allowed her to do anything a frog can, including shooting out her tongue, camouflaging, and jumping extremely far, among other things. Also, the rib bits she made from time to time were cute. But she refused to talk about why she had an additional pair of arms, which no one decided to push. Although, Izumi had a sickening feeling that she knew how she got them because she could tell she wasn't born with them. The grape-haired boy was next, Minoru Mineta. His quirk allowed him to pull off the purple spheres on his head and stick them to things. Very useful for capturing someone, but Izumi would have preferred that he didn't stare at her chest, hips, and legs. Not her fault they filled out over the past year. Hantasiro, a boy with chin-length black hair that was spiked downwards, was next. His quirk allowed him to shoot tape from his elbows, which he demonstrated by tapping Minoru to the wall after he tried to look up Momo's skirt, which was arguably less painful than what Momo would have done to him. The fact her eyes glowed red as she glared at him told them how close she came to murdering a grape, not helped by Himiko glaring daggers at him as well. Poor girl, got away from one pervert only to have to live with another one. A boy named Koji Koda was next. His head looked more like a rock and only spoke in sign language. It was a good thing that Izumi knew JSL, as well as Momo. His quirk allowed him to talk and command animals through speech. He used sign language as a way to communicate without running the risk of accidentally using his quirk. Toru was next, and her quirk was pretty much self-explanatory. She was completely invisible, go figure. A girl with dark purple hair was next, Kyokujiro. Her quirk gave her a pair of headphone jacks attached to her ears by cables that could be extended and allowed her to not only channel the vibrations of her heartbeats but also improved her hearing. The next student introduced herself as Yui Kodai. She was a quiet girl with black hair. She didn't say much and demonstrated her quirk by doubling the size of Durandal for a few seconds before returning him to his normal size. Which impressed everyone, Durandal included. She then grabbed an apple, but it didn't change in size. Izumi guessed that her quirk didn't work on anything organic. Mina went next. Her quirk allowed her to create acid from her skin. It also gave her resistance to acid and other corrosive substances. Fumikage Tokoyami went next. He was a boy with the head of a blackbird and referred to himself as a creature of the dark. Then his quirk appeared, a sentient shadow called Dark Shadow. Izumi geeked out at the sight of her, as sentient quirks were rare and awesome. Of course, she had to be held back from bombarding the living shadow with questions so that the others could introduce themselves. Eijiro Kirishima went next, a boy with red spiky hair. His quirk allowed him to harden any part of his body, which he demonstrated by hardening his arms. Quite the powerful defensive quirk. Rikido Sato, a rather large boy with thick lips, went next. His quirk, Sugar Rush, made him stronger when he eats sugar, but due to his hypoglycemia, too much sugar lowered his cognitive functions and made him dumber. He was also quite a good cook and shared out some cake he made yesterday, which everyone enjoyed. Himiko was last and was reluctant to tell everyone about her quirk. But after some encouragement from Hitoshi, she evidentially told them. Her quirk, Blood Transform, allowed her to transform into anyone after drinking their blood. The more blood she drank, the longer she could maintain the transformation. She also mentioned that her quirk gave her cravings to consume blood and that the gummy bears she had were special ones that were made with blood, which helped satisfy her cravings without having to bite someone. She was expecting her classmates to be disgusted or horrified by her quirk, just like her parents were. She was not expecting Izumi to suddenly say she had a great quirk, followed by her unleashing a barrage of questions about it. Everyone else's reaction was the same. They all thought her quirk was great and was in no way villainous or disgusting. With all the Wanna students introduced, May finally introduced herself and her quirk, Zoom, which allowed her to zoom in on things that are far away, up to 5 kilometers away. She also explained that whilst she had no intention of becoming a hero, Kana had been giving her weapons training, just in case she needs to use one of her more long-ranged babies out in the field, like the railgun she was carrying. A gun wasn't a quirk after all. Also that she had already forgotten everyone's names, save for Durandal's. After that, everyone including May, as she wanted to get more info about everyone, started milling about getting to know everyone a bit better. It'll be a while before any friendships between them start to form, but she could see the groundworks for a few starting to form. Himiko was quick to join in on Izumi's friendship group with Hitoshi, Nito, and Achiko. Tsuyu seemed to gravitate towards them as well. Himiko seemed to also gravitate towards Toru and Mina, due to the three of them like to tease people. Surprisingly, Fumikage's Dark Shadow and Durandal hit it off quite well. No idea why. Almost everyone worked together to make dinner. This would be their first night together, so it was a good way to see who was good at cooking. Having been living with her mother for a long time, Izumi was very good at cooking, as were Tsuyu, Rikido, and surprisingly Inesa. After dinner, most of the students went to bed, Izumi among them. A few stayed up a bit longer, but they weren't up for long before they too went to bed. Tomorrow would be their first proper day at UA. So now that morning has come, everyone went downstairs for breakfast, eating a good meal for their first day at UA before heading towards the school. First day at UA, I'm so excited, Izumi said as she and the rest of the class made their way towards their class. All of whom were in uniform. Yeah. This is great. Inesa said, I've been waiting for this day for my entire life. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Tenya said. We have a short homeroom before orientation. That's not a lot, Mina remarked. Well, it's only a half day today, Ribbit Tsuyu said. Tomorrow is our first full day at UA. For now we're still settling in, Ribbit. Right, thanks Tsuyu, Achiko said with a smile. I said call me Tsuyu said as they reached the classroom and entered, sitting down in their assigned seats. Izumi had to admit, Achiko looked good in her school uniform, the same as the rest of the girls in their class. The boys were, well, the same. Yes, she'd be a fool to not admit that they were all good looking in their own way, but she just wasn't attracted to them. Despite being bi, having every single middle school crush reject her, violently at that, made her less attracted to the opposite sex. And much less likely to tell someone how she feels about them. It didn't help that she has yet to see another therapist after Isa's death. She did have a talk with her mother about her sexuality, that she was bi with a preference for women, and she was completely supportive towards her, saying that she was free to love whoever she wanted as long as she was happy. The fact that the next day she came home to find pride flags all over the place was welcoming and also embarrassing. At least there's Hound Dog she could talk to. She should probably talk to him later today. Izumi sat down with Durandal, sitting on the floor next to her. I don't think we'll be doing just orientation. Our homeroom teacher will probably be putting us through some quirk apprehension and some sparring, just to see what we can do with our quirks. You sure she'd do that? Denki asked. It's what I would do, Izumi replied. If I was the teacher, I would want to know as much about the quirks of my students as I can, and up until now, all I would have seen would be the name of your quirk, and how you used it during the entrance exam. A quirk apprehension test would help show what you can do with your quirks and how creative you can be with them, and the sparring would help show how well you can use them in a combat situation. UA can't exactly help us develop our quirks if they don't know what we can do with them. It makes sense, Momo added. Better to know what your students can do early than later. Hitoshi frowned. Unlike most of the class, his quirk, as well as a few others, didn't give him any physical enhancements, so he was at a disadvantage. He was just glad that he wasn't the only one. The bell signaling the start of school went off, quickly followed by Kana deactivating her cloaking field and appearing behind the teacher's podium. She was here the entire time? Several students thought as Kana removed her mask. Good, nice to see you all here on time, even though that would technically be impossible given you all live on site now, but glad to see none of you overslept. Also Izumi, good observations. We will be doing quirk apprehension and some sparring after orientation. If UA is to teach you how to become heroes, we need to know a lot about how you use your quirks as well as your current combat capabilities. Izumi beamed. This was the first time a teacher had complimented her. Not even the teachers at Nabu complimented her. Although, that was because she kept her mouth shut most of the time. Toru quickly raised her hand. Excuse me miss, but, what is your quirk? Izumi told us your quirk allows you to pull a rifle out of your right elbow, but you've demonstrated the ability to go invisible and it's really confusing me. That's not a quirk she's using, it's an invisibility cloak, Izumi said. It looked too artificial to be a quirk, so, it has to be a cloaking device. The entire class stared at her with a mix of surprise and confusion. Why, you could tell that wasn't a quirk? Ijiro asked, sounding surprised. Izumi nodded. I've seen a lot of different quirks that allow for some form of invisibility, so telling them apart from support equipment that does the same is easy. Plus the biggest giveaway that it's not a quirk is the mask she wears, since unlike quirk invisibility, artificial invisibility prevents light from reaching the eyes, preventing you from seeing, so you would need a special mask to see whilst the cloak is active. If it was a quirk she wouldn't need it, she said whilst everyone looked on in surprise. She had already made it quite clear that she was the go-to expert on quirks in the class, having already dissected their quirks. They just didn't expect her to be able to tell the difference between quick invisibility and equipment invisibility. To be fair, she had a little help. All that analytical training from Sir Night-Eye helped. Figures you'll be able to tell the difference, Hitoshi said with a half smile. Kana smiled. This year had some smart and strong individuals, but they were still kids, and right now none of them was ready for the real world. She coughed to get everyone's attention. Now then, I know you all worked hard to be here, but don't think you're done yet. UA will throw everything and the kitchen sink, sometimes literally, at you to prepare you to become the best heroes you can be. I want every single one of you to give it your all and overcome every challenge we send your way, plus ultra style. Then, and only then, will you be ready to face what awaits you out there as the next generation of heroes? The class listened to her. She was right, their training to become heroes had only just begun. They had to give it their all, not coasting by on their quirks. It was going to be a rough 3 years, but, once it was over, all of them will be able to proudly claim that they were heroes. Now that that's out of the way, if you could all follow me for orientation, the principal wishes to greet you to UA, Kana said. The class followed her out and made their way to the hall for orientation. As school orientations go, it was a standard and boring thing. A short speech from the principal, who looked adorable, followed by the rules, a presentation of where everything was, and introductions to all the staff. They were all also given maps of the school. Izumi paid a lot more attention to the different heroes as they introduced themselves, but there was one that caught her attention, Kanto Aizu, hero named Blossom. Out of all the heroes there, she was the one Izumi knew nothing about. She didn't even know the woman's quirk or what type of hero she was. She prided herself on knowing the names of almost every hero in Japan and at least all the foreign top 10 heroes, even if it can take a while to recognize them. But she knew nothing about Blossom. Her name didn't even sound familiar. Blossom didn't say much, she just told them her name, her hero name, and that she was the homeroom teacher of 3A, coughing occasionally as she spoke. Izumi had so many questions about this woman but no time to ask them, so she wrote a few observations down in one of her notebooks. Once orientation was over, the students filed out of the hall, most making their way back to their classes. 1A was doing the same, following their homeroom teacher out of the hall. God, that was boring, Nina groaned as they walked out of the hall. That's orientation for you, Hitoshi said, who had almost slept through all of it. Boring but necessary. Agreed, Toru said, but did anyone notice that hobo-looking guy? You mean Shota Aizawa? Hanta asked, the one who didn't give his hero name and looked like he really didn't want to be here. Yeah, that's the one, Toru said. Didn't he look somewhat like Hitoshi? Hitoshi let out an annoyed sigh. He's not my father. My dad is an engineer in the JSDF, not a pro hero. Just because we have similar looking hair and bag under our eyes, doesn't mean we're related. Plus my last name is Shinso, not Aizawa. Yui said with a nod. I'm just glad he's not our homeroom teacher, Izumi said. He reminds me too much of my old teachers. So, Kana said, hiding her frown and quickly changing the subject. Now that orientation is done, I want you to go to the changing rooms, get into your gym uniforms, and meet me at the athletic field in 15 minutes. It's time to show off your quirks. Several students smiled as the class made their way towards the changing rooms. They already had their gym uniforms with them, they just needed to put them on. Thanks to the maps they were given, they were able to reach the changing rooms without getting lost. Izumi was, as always, the last to enter the girls' changing room, with Durandal waiting outside. Despite the girls in her class being nice, she didn't think they'll be okay with having Durandal in the changing room with them, so kept him outside. She barely made 3 steps into the changing room before she was proven wrong. Izumi! Why are you leaving Durandal outside? Momo asked, looking concerned. Isn't he supposed to be with you at all times? What? Izumi murmured, sounding surprised, not at all expecting this reaction. Finally, Durandal said as he walked in behind Izumi, someone who understands what at all times means. You girls are okay with me being in here, right? I don't see why we shouldn't. Isuyu replied. You did say he's supposed to keep an eye on you 24/7. He can't exactly do that from outside the changing room, Ribbit. Yui added with a nod. Plus it's unlikely he's going to do anything perverted, unlike that grape-headed boy, Himiko said before she shivered. Seriously, I escaped one pervert only to have to live with another one. Is this something we shouldn't ask about? Achiko asked, sounding worried. Trust me, you do not want to know, Himiko replied before turning back to Izumi. So yes, we're fine with having Durandal around. Now get dressed quickly, you do not want to be late. Izumi could only stand there, surprised by how accommodating they were. Not even the girls at Nabu were this accommodating. A quick nudge from Durandal's tail brought her back to her senses, and she quickly got to getting changed into her gym uniform, doing her best to not look at the other girls as they dressed. The last thing she wanted was to be caught gawping at her fellow girls and end up getting called a pervert. Once she and the other girls were dressed, they made their way towards the athletic field along with the boys, finding Lady Nagant waiting for them. She looked up at her phone. Not bad. Could get changed a bit quicker, but that can be improved later. Now then, she said as she held up a ball. Inesa, how far could you throw in middle school? Inesa looked at her with a confused look. 86 meters. Good. Now stand in that circle and throw this ball, Kana said as she passed him the ball, but you can use your quirk to throw it. Inesa looked down at the ball in his hands before smiling. He made his way over to the circle and prepared to throw it, but as he pulled his arm back, everyone could feel the air around them being pulled towards him. With a large smile, Inesa threw the ball with a massive gust of wind, sending the ball flying off into the distance with the wind propelling it further and further away. Wow! Such power! That's a recommended student for you. Yeah. Inesa said proudly, now we can show off what we're all made of. Kana smiled as she looked at her phone. Indeed you can, she said as she turned it around so that the students could see the distance Inesa had managed to throw the ball. Over 2,000 meters. The class exclaimed. How the hell are we supposed to top that? You're not now anyway, Kana said with a smile. Like the rest of our body's quirks are something that can only get stronger with training, and up until now not many of you will have been training your quirks. This will allow me to see what you can do with them now, and how you can improve them. I expect all of you to give it your all, no holding back, alright? Yes sensei, the class collectively replied, all excited to use their quirks. Kana smirked before she pulled out one of her hairs and started molding it into a bullet. Good to see you all excited. But, let's up the stakes a bit, she said as she finished making a bullet. For those who don't know, my quirk not only allows me to pull a sniper rifle out of my elbow but also use my hair to make bullets. This one I just made is a rubber bullet. And whoever comes last is going to be shot with it, she said with a smirk as the entire class went pale. Contrary to popular belief, heroes are not bulletproof, not all of them anyway. One well-placed round can take you down just like anyone else. And thanks to a certain egg-headed roboticist, villains have been using guns a lot more in recent years. Think of this as an opportunity to see the value of putting body armor into your costume, she explained, and yes, you will be wearing a ballistic vest when I shoot you. I'm not foolish enough to shoot one of you without adequate protection. Everyone nodded nervously. None of them wanted to know what it feels like to be shot, but she did make a valid point. A bullet is still a bullet, and most of them didn't have quirks that made them bulletproof. So, to avoid getting shot at by the best marksman in Japan, they will give it their all and shine during the tests. Izumi herself was, whilst worried about getting shot, determined to give it her all. Whilst she could manage around 5% of one for all, it should be enough to give her a good score. At least she wasn't threatening them with expulsion. The tests Kana made them do were a 50-meter dash, grip strength test, standing long jump, ball throw, which Inesa was exempt from since he had already done it, seated toe touch, sidestep, sit-up tests, and endurance run. Some students did better than others, like Tenya in the 50-meter dash, Toru in the seated toe touch, Minoru for the sidestep, etc. Even those whose quirks weren't suited for the tests were giving it their all as well and were demonstrating some creative uses with their quirks to do better than normal, like Yui, who shrunk the grip strength device to try and get a higher score. For the ball throw, Momo made a Type 38 field gun and managed to shoot the ball around 11,000 meters, a score she was proud of, up until Hitoshi brainwashed her and made her give him the field gun and fired it himself. He didn't manage to get the same distance as Momo, but it was still impressive. Then Achiko sent her ball into orbit, getting a score of infinity. Nito of course was killing the events by copying the quirks of those that were best suited for the event, but he made a few hiccups along the way, using someone's quirk only for another to outperform the one he used or was unable to use it effectively. Guess he needed to research everyone's quirks a bit more. Didn't help that Kana kept making him go first. Izumi was doing well herself. She wasn't allowed to wear Durandal during the tests, but that made sense as he wasn't a quirk. But even without him she was able to do well, not enough to get first place, but enough that she wasn't going to get last. She just couldn't help but feel sorry for whoever was going to end up in last place. Unless it was Minoru, she wouldn't feel sorry for him in the slightest. Overall the tests took about an hour for them to finish. Alright, Kana said with a smile as they finished the last test. I'll take a while for the scores to be compiled, so in the meantime, we'll be doing some one-on-one sparring. The results from this sparring will not affect your score for the quirk apprehension, but it will tell me your current combat capability, she explained. Rules are simple. The winner is decided when one of you is either immobilized or knocked out of the ring, and yes, you can use your quirks. And no going for knockouts, this is friendly sparring, not WWE. Try to show some restraint. The entire class nodded. It would look rather bad if they got seriously injured on the first day of school. Didn't stop a lot of them from being excited. Now, I've already chosen who's fighting who, but you won't know who you are fighting until I call you, Kana said. Now then, first match, Inesa versus Izumi. Izumi instantly paled. I have to fight him, she thought as she turned her head towards her large opponent. He had already demonstrated just how strong he was, naturally and with his quirk. He could throw her out of the ring with a massive gust of wind. How was she going to be able to fight that? Izumi Durandal said, bringing Izumi out of her funk. Don't worry, you've got this. All you need to do is survive his opening attack. Izumi nodded. Thanks, she said with a smile before she rushed over towards the ring. She knew Anesa could put a lot of power into his wind, but if she could withstand it somehow, he would be left open. All she needed to do was not get thrown out. Izumi entered the ring and stood opposite Anesa, taking on a combat stance. Kana, seeing that the two were ready, raised her hand. Begin. Anesa immediately swung an arm towards Izumi, sending a massive gust of wind towards her. He was quick, but so was Izumi. Activating full cowling, she crouched down and dug her fingers into the ground beneath her, using them to anchor herself to the ground as what felt like gale force winds blew past her. Her body was blown back, but thanks to her fingers being embedded into the ground, she was not sent flying out of the ring. The wind died down just as quickly as Anesa had summoned it. Without skipping a beat, Izumi got back up and charged Anesa, one for all still coursing through her. She didn't know how soon Anesa could attack again with his quirk, so she had to act fast and knock him out of the ring before he can attack again. With a loud cry, she punched Anesa in the chest, ignoring the look of complete shock on the boy's face as he was sent flying out of the ring. The entire class fell silent at the display of power, and at how Izumi was not only able to resist it, but also defeat a recommended student. Izumi herself was panting heavily, a look of determination on her face, which quickly turned to one of abstract panic as she realized what she did, and was now worried that she had overdone it. Yeah! Anesa suddenly shouted as he sat up with a large smile on his face. That's the kind of hot-blooded action I was expecting from you, eh? He said before he stood up and bowed, smashing his head against the floor. Thank you for such a hot-blooded fight. Izumi looked rather confused by Anesa's reaction to losing. You're welcome, she said nervously, not expecting him to be this excited. That was not how I expected that to go. I did tell you she was the top scorer in the entrance exam, Ribbit. At least he's taking his defeat well. So manly. As the two made it back to the group, Kana called the next match, Momo vs Nito. Izumi noticed that, as the two made their way towards the ring, Nito tapped Anesa's shoulder, his pinky making contact with his skin. He just copied Anesa's quirk. She silently wished him luck, as whilst he could use creation like Momo, his lack of knowledge of atomic configurations meant he couldn't use it as effectively as Momo could. When both of them were ready, Kana started the match, and moments later Nito was sent flying back onto the ground, clutching his groin and whimpering in pain, with Momo watching with shock, a partly constructed recoil's rifle poking out of her chest. It did not take long before everyone knew what had happened. Oh God, I'm so sorry. Momo said as she rushed over to Nito, dropping the partly constructed weapon. I didn't mean to shoot you in the crotch. Nito groaned as he clutched his privates. The beanbag Momo had fired at him was still where it was when it impacted his groin. It's okay, he whimpered. Should have probably seen this coming, and been more discreet with whose quirk I'm copying. God, this feels like karma for something. Izumi rushed over to help Momo carry Nito out of the ring, putting him down a safe distance away and giving him a bag of ice to put over his crotch, the other boys looking at him with sympathy. Note to self, invest in adequate crotch protection, Tenya remarked as all the other boys nodded in agreement. Achiko vs Tsuyu was next, and it was a quick one, with Tsuyu wrapping her long tongue around Achiko, picking her up and dropping her out of the ring before the gravity girl could do anything. Achiko looked rather disappointed by this outcome, having expected to do better. Hey, don't worry about it, Achiko, Tsuyu said as the two walked back. You just suffered from a bad matchup, Ribbit. I'm sure our next fight will go better for you. Achiko smiled. Thanks, Tsu. Denki vs Koji was next and was also over rather quickly. Denki overloaded his brain by using too much electricity and was unable to continue, making Koji the de facto winner, much to the quiet boys' confusion. Toru vs Hanta was an interesting one. The moment the match began, Toru started to strip, which caused Hanta to look away and Minoru to look on with lust, only to be disappointed because Toru is invisible, something Hanta realized too late before he was punched in the gut by an invisible fist. He was then kicked to the ground, dragged over to the edge of the ring and thrown out. What I would give for some glasses that allow you to see invisible people, Minoru remarked, sounding annoyed before Kyoka shocked him with one of her jacks. She promptly wiped it clean as if it had just touched something filthy. Minoru versus Tenya was another quick one. Tenya, not wanting to give Minoru time to fill the ring with his balls, charged and punted him out of the ring with a kick, much to the delight of all the girls. Durandal even recorded it for later viewing. Himiko versus Mina was next, and this actually lasted for more than a few seconds. With Mina skating around on her acid to keep her distance and Himiko jumping around acrobatically to avoid Mina's acid attacks. Izumi was amazed by how acrobatic the two were, and whilst the two's attacks were sloppy and could do with some work, Mina looked like she was breakdancing at times. They were very good at avoiding their opponent's attacks. Of course, neither of them could keep this up forever. One mistake was all that was needed to give the other the advantage. Unfortunately for Himiko, she made the mistake first. The fight went on for so long that Mina was able to cover most of the ring with her acid, giving Himiko less and less space to safely land on. A mistimed jump caused her to slip on some acid, giving Mina the opening she needed to push Himiko out of the ring. "You okay, Himiko?" Mina asked as she walked over to her. "Yeah, I'm fine," Himiko replied with a sigh. "Just thought I'd do better." "That acid of yours is very slippery." "Indeed it is," Mina said with a smile. "You might want to clean your shoes on the grass." "Whilst it was weak, the acid can still cause damage to your shoes." "Noted," Himiko said with a smile as she rushed over to the grass and cleaned her shoes before returning next to Mina. While those two became fast friends, Hitoshi observed, "Crap, now I have to deal with two of them." Kyoka vs Fumicage's match was shockingly evenly matched. Dark Shadow allowed Fumicage to attack from range, but Kyoka was able to keep the living shadow back with her jacks, sending vibrations through them to keep her at bay whilst she advanced slowly, pushing both Fumicage and Dark Shadow back until Fumicage stepped out of the ring. "Fumicage is out of bonds," Kana announced. Fumicage frowned. "I'm sorry about that, Fumi," Dark Shadow said, "those shockwaves stung." "It's alright, Dark Shadow," Fumicage said as they returned to the group. "We were just ill-prepared. Next time will be different." Rikido vs Ijiro was, for the most part, a slug feast. The two boys charging in and punching each other, but even early on it was obvious Ijiro had the upper hand. His hardening allowed him to withstand Rikido's punches whilst hitting back harder. It didn't help that Rikido was nearing his sugar limit, having used a lot earlier. And soon he was punched out of the ring. That left Hitoshi and Yui as the last two to fight. "This will be interesting," Momo remarked as Hitoshi and Yui made their way to the ring. "Why do you think that?" Achiko asked. "Neither of them will be able to use their quirks," Momo replied. "Yui doesn't say much and apparently doesn't react to anything, so Hitoshi will struggle to get her to respond to him, but there's not much for her to use her quirk on. They're going to be fighting hand to hand." Izumi nodded. "Neither of them will be able to use their quirks for this." This was probably why Kana had them fight each other, putting them into a situation where they can't easily use their quirks. Now they'll see that you can't always rely on your quirk in a fight, Kana thought before she started the match. Hitoshi and Yui quickly took on combat postures before slowly advancing towards each other, arms held in front of them as they cautiously approached one another. They then lunged and started throwing punches and kicks at each other, blocking or dodging as best they could. When did Hitoshi learn karate? Izumi wondered as she watched the two fight, recognizing the fighting style the two were using. "Don't know," Nito replied, still holding the ice pack over his crotch, not complaining. "Gives him the edge he needs in a fight. Can't just coast by with his quirk after all. Probably should learn martial arts myself." "Looks like Hitoshi isn't the only one who knows karate," Momo remarked. "I'd say they've been doing it for less than a year, probably around 8 or 9 months. "You must know a lot about martial arts to know that," Kyoka said. "My dad taught me a lot of different fighting styles," Momo explained. "He wanted to make sure that, when I become a hero, I know how to fight properly." Hitoshi and Yui still have a bit to go. "I've noticed several flaws with their attacks and postures, but they're holding their own quite well." Izumi nodded before she focused back on the fight. This was not what she was expecting out of the fight. She thought Hitoshi might try and get a reaction out of Yui. Is still a response after all. But this was surprising. The two continued to duke it out for about another minute before Yui managed to press her hand against Hitoshi's chest, shrinking his shirt just enough so that he couldn't move his upper body. She then did the same to his trousers. Shit, Hitoshi cursed under his breath as he tried to move his body, but his clothing was far too tight for him to move. Looks like you got me. Yui said with a nod before her face suddenly went blank, indicating Hitoshi had used his quirk on her. Hitoshi let out a depressed sigh. Damn it. Walk out of the ring, he said, watching with an almost depressed look as Yui walked out of the ring, releasing her from his control the moment she stepped out of the ring. Surprised as she turned back towards Hitoshi before she looked down with a frown and put her fingers together, deactivating her quirk and restoring his clothing to its normal size. Well done, you two, Kana said with a smile. You two look to have a good grasp on fighting, but like everyone else, there's room for improvement. Now, rejoin the other. Hitoshi and Yui nodded before they returned to the group. You okay, Hitoshi? Izumi asked, sounding worried. I'm fine, Hitoshi replied, just not the outcome I was expecting. Right, so, now that the sparring is done, it's time to show you your scores for the quirk apprehension test, Kana said before a hologram appeared next to her with a scoreboard on it. All eyes immediately went to the bottom of the list, hoping that their name wasn't at the bottom. Moments later, all the girls smiled before turning towards Minoru. Minoru Mineta, Kana said before she held up a ballistic vest. Put this on. Minoru gulped whilst the girls watched with glee. This was going to be fun to watch. That will be it for this part. I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and comment if you want part 11. If you want to hear more from me, subscribe. I hope to see you all in the next one.